guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm Kat, and today I'm doing my August wrap-up. So for August, most of August I spent actually home in the States. So actually everything that I'm going to talk about today I either read on my Kindle or I don't have anymore. 2 of the books I read while I was in the States and I left them there, and then 12 of the books I borrowed from a friend while I was in the States and I read them there, and then I gave them back to my friend again. So today I'm just going to jump right into it. I'm going to sort them from the least impressive, in my opinion, to the most impressive. So without further ado, let's just get into it. So the first book that I have is a book that I DNF'd about 40% of the way through, and that is Mad Girl by Bryony Gordon. So this book deals a lot with Bryony's struggle with OCD and how it impacts her life. When the novel opens, she says she's going to take us back in time to show that nothing really traumatic happened in her past. She came from a loving household, a very kind of average, everyday upbringing, and then she was going to talk about how it has manifested in her current life. I had really high hopes for Mad Girl. I thought it was going to be similar to Furiously Happy by Jenny Lawson, where it takes a serious subject matter and it mixes it with humor. Furiously Happy by Jenny Lawson is seriously amazing. It is so funny. I was like dying laughing. And I really can't say the same of Mad Girl, which is why I DNF'd it. I think 2 things happened. One, and probably the main one, is that for a book that is supposed to deal with a serious topic in a funny way, I didn't find it funny almost at all. And I think a large part of that is maybe the difference between American humor and British humor. Often, I don't exactly understand British humor. A lot of the jokes go over my head, or I don't think that particular style of telling a story or telling a joke is so funny. I much prefer American style humor or Asian style humor for some reason. So I didn't find it that funny. And then the other problem that I had with it was the way in which she was telling the story. So a lot of it was she was just telling it like it's a diary, and it's all tell and almost no show. So I felt that by 40% I'd given it a really good go, and I can't say that I highly recommend it, but there might be things to learn from it if you can make it to the end, or if you really like British humor, you might enjoy it much more than I did. So, moving on. So the next book is such an unfortunate DNF. It is The Bone Witch by Chupeco. This book had a lot of hype and then also a lot of bad things said about it, and I was really hoping that I would just get into it because sometimes, you know, if people are saying the writing style isn't to their taste, well, everyone has different tastes, so I was really hoping that I would really enjoy it, but I didn't. So this book, the reason I'm so bitter about it is because the world is amazing. So the book opens and T has recently found out that she is a bone witch, which means she can kind of control death. She can bring death upon something and also bring it back to life. So she is a type of witch that is very feared, and it's kind of dark and kind of seen as a sinister art in the world. And I am like, yes, bone witch, I'm here for it. And also in the world, people's hearts are in like glass pendants on their necks, which I just thought was like the coolest story element ever. There was the first chapter where a bard runs into T on the beach and she is with a monster corpse. The first chapter, amazing. I'm like, oh my god, yes. But then the bard asks T to tell about her life. So then every other chapter it alternates between the bard being with T in current day and then the story of T in the past about when she was discovered and then her training and as she moves through the realms. So the major problem I had with this storytelling dynamic was that it was all tell. Almost no show. I think it's like the worst case of telling that I have run across in a long time. And I think that I would have DNF'd it much earlier, like probably within the first few chapters, if the world wasn't so awesome. So the magic elements, the beast elements, the heart elements. But, you know, I got to the 50-point mark and then I had about 30 hours back on a flight from America and I just would prefer to read anything else other than that. So if you can't focus on a plane flight, I don't think I'm going to get back to it. So I'd really love to hear what you think. Let me know if I stopped at like the worst time ever and that it gets so much better and I would totally regret my choice, because then maybe it might just push me back into reading it. But as of right now, I also DNF'd The Bone Witch. And I'm a little bitter about it because it sounds amazing. Okay, so getting into books that I did finish. So the first one is The Northwater by McGuire, and I gave it 2 stars. So this book, I just need to preface it a little bit. I gave it to my father for Father's Day because he loves murder mysteries and he loves sea adventure. There is a murder that happens on a shipping vessel that is heading up into the North Waters. I thought my dad would kind of enjoy it because I thought it was going to be more about sailing the seas and the murder mystery. But actually, I realized when I landed in America, my father said, like, were you testing me? Was that a test? Like, why would you give me that book? And then I panicked a little and was like, oh my god, did I just give him the worst book ever? And the answer is, kind of did. Then, of course, I felt so bad that I read it. Major trigger warnings, which I feel like should be on the back of that book especially, because it's not like it's hinted at. These are very, very crucial elements to the plot, and they are gone into in like very exact, specific, brutal, visceral detail. So there is pedophilia, murder of children, rape, torture, and there is a lot of violence, like a lot of violence, and also cruelty to animals. Just like tack that on at the end of that shit list. Just from like the beginning, just the whaling and the clubbing of the seals was terrible, and then all the human elements was just like, why would you write this book? So I am not a fan of The Northwater, but actually I will say it has 2 stars because the writing is actually quite good. His actual writing abilities and the writing style, and also I read until the end wanting to know what happened, and also because I felt major book guilt about giving my dad this book. So then when I finished the book, I apologized to my dad and I was like, oh, I am really sorry. I didn't know, but no, I don't recommend The Northwater. No, don't read it. It's so bad. Okay, so next up is a heist book, which I'm always keen for, and it is The Morningstar by Chandler, and I gave it 3 stars. There are 2 main characters. Simon is an FBI agent, and then there is Jeremy. So Jeremy is an international art thief, and he's kind of also like a socialite. He's kind of like Catwoman. Basically, I was hoping that this would be cat and mouse game, like Thomas Crown Affair type thing, where, you know, they're chasing each other and then it's like, catch me, and then there's some like romance at the end. So first off, the writing style isn't really to my taste. The banter between characters was really dense and really like extra. No one would speak that way in real life. Can you guys just stop? Just stop and get on with the action, get on with the plot, because it's kind of like reading a soap opera where I'm just like, this is so damn dramatic right now, and this isn't even the dramatic part. It's just they're chatting on some steps. But the main reason why it gets 3 stars is because, okay, so one is an FBI agent, one is an art thief. From the very onset, there is such a great opportunity for tension. Like, you basically made tension just by setting it up as like law abider, criminal. And then, what do? They basically solve that tension like very early on in the novel, and they take it somewhere else. So like the tension that they were trying to write in to fill the tension that they just destroyed, it didn't work for me at all. So like after that point where they solved that tension, the tension just like dropped out of the book for me. And the other thing I'm gonna say is that the romantic tension never arrived at the station. And I don't mean that they didn't complete an act. I'm not saying if they did or they didn't. I'm saying that some sort of emotional like climax or like reunion or something, nada. So I'm assuming that maybe they're holding that off until like the further books. But for me, I felt like it was kind of like, okay, so you dropped the tension out of the first book by having them act a certain way, and then you didn't bring the romantic train to my station. I don't know how much I trust you to like do what I want you to do in the next books. And I'm not saying like obviously we control the writer, but I'm just saying You know, when you set up as a cat and mouse FBI agent and art thief, you know, there's a lot of chance for like sexy dramatic tension, and I didn't really feel that there was so much sexy dramatic tension. Okay, so the next book on the list that I read is 3.5 stars, and it is The Girl in 6E by A.R. Torre. So this book I had such high hopes for because it sounded so original, and it totally was. I can't think of another book that I've read that's similar to it. It basically follows a girl named Deanna, and she is a cam girl who basically hasn't been outside of her apartment for 3 years. Why? It's because she has an obsession with death and murder, and she is afraid that if she goes outside of her apartment, she will murder people. That's right, she's afraid of being a murderer, and I just thought that was such an interesting idea. So, you think that everything is fine, but then one of her clients starts acting out fantasies involving a little girl. And she is like, okay, fine, like there's other people who have those same kind of fantasies, but then a little girl with the same name goes missing on Amber Alert. And so Deanna is forced to make a choice. Does she leave her apartment and possibly save the little girl, but possibly murder other people? Or does she stay inside and let the little girl go, but keep other people safe? So I just thought that was like an amazing premise for like any story, and I couldn't wait to read it. And I will say I had no problem getting into it. The writing was fine, everything was fine, the pace was relatively fast. There just like wasn't that extra something to make me be like, that is an amazing book, I love that book, I'm gonna recommend it to everyone. Well, I mean, aside from the subject matter being a little touchy, so like, I can't exactly recommend it to everyone. So if you're looking for something that is really interesting and original, and that it will just keep you kind of on the edge of your seat until the end, I really recommend it. It was kind of great. Okay, so the next book that I'm going to talk about is Captive by Jex Lane. And I normally don't talk about the romance kind of smutty books that I read, but I figured I would put this one in here because the plot was so well done and the world building was so well done that I think it goes beyond what normal like bonbon palette cleanser books would kind of be like. And also, the particular reason why I read this specific one is because people have been saying it is like Captive Prince by C.S. Pacat, and if you don't know, I am an absolutely huge Pacat fan. So anyway, Captive follows Matthew, and he has an insatiable hunger for blood, and he really can't control the part of him that is vampire. And one night he is caught in a trap set by an incubus, and that's right, you heard me, incubus. So this world basically has two main supernatural beings, vampires and incubi, basically. And the incubus is actually a high general called General Tarek, and he is one of the generals in the vampire-incubi war, and he is going to try to use Matthew as a weapon against the vampires. So this book has a lot of things that where I could see people comparing it to Captive Prince. For instance, Lord Tarek is obviously so much like Laurent, like cool, distant, very focused on winning the war, sometimes has ulterior motives that there isn't apparent to the main character or to the reader, and then later you're like, oh, he's not such a bad guy, but then at other times you're like, oh, he's a total dick, and he is a bad guy, he's a very bad guy. And then obviously Matthew is kept captive against his will, and he is also very strong, and he's a very good fighter, and he's also kind of hot-headed. So I can see where the parallels like align between Captive and Captive Prince, but some of the things that are amazing about this book are amazing in their own right and completely separate than Captive Prince, and I'd say it's the supernatural elements. They are really amazing. So the world and the war that's going on and the creation of the vampires and the incubi were really cool, especially the incubi and the vampires. I've never seen them written that way, and also I've never read anything major that had to do with incubi as like a main part of the storyline, so that was just really, really cool. So I think for me, one of the main differences why Captive Prince just really got me so well is the character development. A major thing that's lacking in Captive is the development of the characters. You expect there to be some emotional development between them or on their own, some sort of, you know, character arc where you're like, wow, I can really see the change, or like, wow, I can really see the tension building between them. But instead, I think that I was so caught up in, and maybe the author was as well, the story and the war going on, that all of the focus was on that and building it so finely and doing it so well that I think a lot of the character development got lost. So if vampires and incubi and war and kind of a captive story is to your liking, then give it a go. Okay, so the next book that I'm going to talk about is A Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue by Mackenzi Lee. So this book had mad hype, so much hype that, well, and it's not even just hype, like I read the blurb and I hyped it to myself. I was like, I need this book, we need to get it when we get off the plane, and we're gonna read it and it's gonna be great. So when I got off my plane, I had a layover in Dallas-Fort Worth, and luckily they had it at the bookstore there, so I bought it and I read it during my layover. It was freaking adorable. The main character's name is Monty, and it is set around the time of the Grand Tour in Europe, which is basically the young elite who have money and time to spare would go touring around Europe on various adventures, collect artifacts, kind of see the world in a very rich and spoiled type way. And Monty's big problem right now is that his father wants him to settle down and stop going to, you know, all those brothels and drinking and gambling. You know, basically all the stuff that the upper echelons shouldn't really be doing. And so this is his last grand adventure. He decides to take along with him on this adventure Percy, who is his best friend, and he also has to take his younger sister. He's going to drop her at finishing school and then be on their merry way. Obviously, best laid plans go totally awry in the best of ways. I found that every main character was a really great representation of a huge problem that we are having in society now, in that was still prevalent at that time, even more so, punishable by death. So for Monty's part, his thing, other than not being able to control his excesses in society, is really that he is kind of in love with his best friend, and he obviously can't live the life that he wants because being gay is punishable by death. It is a really good look at queer representation of that time and the struggles, and I think it brings about an important discussion. And then his best friend Percy has darker skin because of his parentage, and he is often bringing a different perspective to a lot of the instances that they encounter, where Monty is looking at it from a very like white privilege perspective, and then Percy is reminding him, you know, not everyone was born with a spoon in your mouth, not everyone can do that. So it's bringing to light a lot of issues about white privilege and equality and racism. And then also, one of my favorite characters is also his sister, who doesn't want to go to finishing school. She wants to be a scientist and a doctor. So also feminism and the space for women in science. So this book just had like a lot of boxes, and it was basically just like within the first third, just like ticking all of them as we went along, and I was really, really excited about it. What I found happening though was about maybe halfway through, the plot kind of fell apart and it never really got back into any semblance of order. But overall, I really loved the messages that the book was saying, and I mean, I read it in one sitting at a layover, and it was just phenomenal. A lot of the dialogue was so cute, and the pairing is cute, and a lot of the instances that happen are really interesting, and I would say it's quite high-paced. So if you're looking for a book that is just an adorable summer read, also kind of like a road trip novel, basically queer grand tour, I would recommend this book. In fact, the reason I don't have it, I bought it, I should have it in my little hands right now, is because I gave it to my little sister. I was like, you should read this book because it's so cute, and oh my god, yay, yay, so cute. So the last 12 books that I'm going to talk about really briefly are all the same series, and it is Monstress. I read volumes 1 through 12. I borrowed them from a friend who had them in America, and then I gave them back to that same friend, so I don't have them. So Monstress is written by Marjorie Liu and illustrated by Takeda, and it is amazing. It is basically an alternative Asia in the early 1900s that has a heavily matriarchal society structure, and there are Art Deco elements and steampunk elements, and it is about a girl named Micah, and she she is being caught up in this world because she has something inside of her that is a monster, essentially. And it is an ancient monster, an ancient force, and she doesn't know how to control it. It doesn't know how to live in symbiosis with her. As she's working, she is trying to get revenge. She's trying to figure out about her parentage. She's trying to figure out where she fits in the world. She's really angry, and she's really violent, and I mean, that's one of the things that I really, really loved about it, because I love seeing badass women just fucking kicking ass. And, you know, sometimes I feel like it's a cop-out because in men's action movies, the men can often be really angry and get revenge and they like slaughter everyone. And it's such like a cathartic thing. I'm not condoning murder, but I'm saying it's very cathartic to read about it or to watch it. And oftentimes women have to pull back just one step where they don't exactly murder, but they like hurt them in some way. But that is definitely not the case with Monstress. There is a lot of blood, and there is a lot of talking about issues that are really important. And so I'm just gonna say that I'm totally in love with it, and I have such a crush on the illustrator and the writer, and I am going to do an in-depth review of it in the future and talk about some of the elements that I loved about it, particularly the matriarchal society and feminism, especially related to Asia, particularly otherness and disfigurement, particularly I think places where they might have got their inspiration, because there are quite a few instances of loss of certain body parts that come up again and again, especially in Asian graphics and Asian animation. So I really want to talk about that, so look out for it. Overall, I would give, it's hard to rate it because it's volumes 1 through 12, but overall I would give it 4.5 to 5 stars, depending on like which one it is. I just really love it. I don't know why I wasn't on this bandwagon like years ago. I feel like I've been so left behind, but now I'm caught up. So let me know if you guys have also read Monstress and if you also love it, because I'm just like over here dying because of how brilliant it is. So if you guys have any recommendations, I would really appreciate it, especially related to Monstress. If you've read anything else that is along that same kind of vein, any recommendations would be highly appreciated. Thank you so much for watching this wrap-up. I hope that you got a lot of reading done, and I will see you next time. Bye!